Hey everyone, and welcome to our May live event with Nicki LaFoille. She's once again here to answer all of your sewing questions, so thank you so much for being here, Nicki.
Happy to be here.
All right, we're going to get started right away with some questions that we've already got coming in. The first one here is from Arlene, and she wants to know, when making an A-line skirt, which is better, cutting 2, 4, or 6 pieces?
So I'm guessing that means like cutting gores in an A-line skirt. So it all depends on what you're looking for. Those seaming details of the gore on your skirt can be cool. You can, do them in different fabrics. You can eliminate the darts in that seam. So whatever you're going for, there's no better or worse way to do it. There's just, if you are working with a fabric that is slippery or hard to, really shifty, I would minimize seams like velvet and velveteen, or something like rayon, which can be really slippery and shifty to work with. Minimizing seams will not, will be better for not giving you a headache when you're sewing. But it all depends on what you are going for.
Is there one over the other that's better for, say, if you have like some fit issues you need to fix or anything like that?
Yeah, if there are some fitting issues, fitting issues can be resolved easier when you have more seams. So there are more places to pinch in and let out. So it can be beneficial in that regard to have more seams, for sure.
Perfect. All right, our next question here is from Carol, and she wants to know, what kind of interfacing should one use for collars and cuffs on a white shirt fabric? A lightweight woven fusible seems to cause bubbles after laundering.
Good question. For collars and cuffs, I always use this. This is Featherweight Fusible by Pellon. You can see it's really very soft and malleable. That's really all you need for collars, cuffs, facings. That's all I use for my garments. The bubbling may be caused by, or maybe helped by pre-shrinking your interfacing. That might cause bubbling. If you don't pre-shrink your interfacing, it may shrink during adhering or during laundering, when it gets exposed to heat, and during washing and drying, especially when it gets exposed to a lot of heat, it can shrink up and cause bubbles on the right side of your fabric. So shrinking your interfacing is actually a kind of an important step that I did not learn about until fairly recently. So do not feel bad if anyone didn't know that. I didn't even know that.
And it sounds so counterintuitive because you're applying a little bit of heat to it.
Yeah, and the fusible is, just these little tiny dots of glue on the wrong side. But to pre-shrink, just kind of loosely fold your yardage, put it in a big bowl of hot water, not boiling, but too hot to touch, and then let your interfacing air dry. And that should have applied enough heat to pre-shrink that, so that you don't get any shrinkage as you're adhering it or after your garment is constructed. And if you forget to do that before you are constructing your garment, you can do that at your ironing board to some extent with your steam iron. Place your interfacing glue side down on a press cloth, and just hold your iron above it and steam it. Don't touch your iron to the fabric or to the interfacing, or you will adhere it to your ironing board or your press cloth. Just hold it above and apply a lot of steam, and that can help get rid of some of that shrinkage from the interfacing before you apply it to your project.
Do you ever have issues? So I guess if you forget everything about pre-shrinking and you haven't done any of that, if you maybe haven't completely fused your interfacing in place or something like that, can that also cause a bubbling issue?
If you haven't fused your interfacing all the way.
Yeah, like if I mean, I've definitely done this a few times where I'm just trying to go too fast and I think it's in place, but it's really not completely fused all the way. And so then later on down the road, it kind of starts peeling up a little bit.
That could cause some problems for sure. Yeah. So make sure, yeah, as you are adhering your interfacing that you apply a lot of pressure and heat and let the iron sit on the interfacing. I always count to 10 and then check it, see if it'll pull up, and then let the interfacing cool before you pick it up and start moving it around.
Perfect. All right, our next question here comes from Sherry, and she would like to know some tips and tricks for somebody new to embroidery.
Cool. New to embroidery. It's an exciting world to get into. So tips and tricks for embroidery. I would say definitely always use embroidery thread. Embroidery thread is constructed a little differently. It's stronger and made for the high speeds and friction of an embroidery machine. And always use an embroidery needle, same concept. It's created, it has a larger eye to allow the thread to move through the needle with the fast speeds and all the friction that it puts on the thread.
What about stabilizers? Because that is the one thing that I knew nothing about getting into embroidery.
Yes, I was just thinking about that. So stabilizer is a big deal when you're embroidering. You want to always try to match your stabilizer weight to your fabric weight. So if you are embroidering something very thin, like a lightweight quilting cotton or something, just use a lightweight either tearaway stabilizer or water soluble stabilizer, or something that kind of matches the weight. That's always what I stuck with when I was embroidering, water soluble or tearaway stabilizer. But they also make cutaway stabilizer. It's typically a heavier weight stabilizer if you're embroidering fleece or other heavy fabrics like wool.
Like a jacket or something, maybe.
A jacket, something like that. So, again, matching your stabilizer weight to your fabric weight. And they also make a heat removable stabilizer, which comes in a very, very thin film-like variety. So if you are embroidering something very thin, that can be a good option. But always make sure the method of removal for your stabilizer is also compatible with your fabric. So you don't want to use a water-soluble stabilizer with a fabric that you don't want to get wet, like a velvet. You wouldn't want to get velvet wet or something like that. So take that into consideration. Those are some basic, very beginner things. And then it's just making sure you have, aligning your fabric in the hoop for your design and all of those things that get a little bit more technical. But those are some very basic things, basic tips and tricks to get started.
Absolutely. And just practicing. Once you get, the first couple designs done, then you'll know sort of what you need to build on to go from there.
Right.
All right. Our next question here is from Anna, and she says, when underlining a knit fabric for a jacket, as an example, what type of knit fabric should be used?
I would say for linings and underlinings, a lighter weight fabric would be probably best. So a lighter weight knit. Since underlining, technically you're sewing the pieces, the fabric piece and the underlining piece together before you construct the garment. So I would use something lighter so that you don't get too much bulk in the seams. So a jersey knit is good for that. They make knit fabrics in really like light tissue weight, very, very lightweight things. So if it's just for adding opacity to a sheer knit or a little bit of body to something very, very light, all you would need is something a little bit light on the inside. And that will do what you need it to do, and it won't add too much weight and bulk in your seams.
Absolutely. All right. I'm not entirely sure I understand this next question, but so if we don't, we're going to have to ask for some clarification from Ruth, but she wants to know which is the best to hold an Angora blanket when sewing because she has some arthritic hands. I'm not sure if she means actually holding it.
Yeah. So when sewing, I think when sewing a blanket like that, it would probably be heavy. So like trying to hold it up as it's going through the needle. I would try to get the bulk of it like on your sewing table, like next to the machine, so that you're not having to hold it all up. But there may be tools to also help like pinch down on fabric as it's getting pulled through. I'm not entirely sure. I have not played around with tools to help with anything like that. So
No, I would say if you can search for like ergonomic sewing tools or something like that, they might have something that could help. Or if not, like that search term might get you, in the direction of finding something that would help you out with that. All right, our next question here is from Kay, and they want to know, have you ever stitched with glow-in-the-dark thread, and what kind of machine settings do you use if you do?
I have not stitched with glow-in-the-dark thread. I've read some articles about it, but I think you can really just treat it like regular thread. There's not much difference in weight or anything, so if you start stitching with it and you find that it's maybe a little heavier weight than regular thread, you can mess with your tension settings. But in general, I'd say just go right ahead with your normal settings.
I actually have some down in my sewing room. I got some as a gift, and I've only used it one time, but it is really the coolest stuff ever. But I used it to embroider a small little design because I wanted to see how it looked glowing. So I went ahead and used an embroidery needle. But I mean, yeah, otherwise I would have just used an all-purpose needle for that. But turned out pretty cool.
Cool.
Our next question here is from Kathy, and she says, what is the best way to embroider signatures on your project? Like copying someone's signature and embroidering over it for a keepsake project. She does not have an embroidery machine.
Oh, that's cool though, to copy over a signature. That would be awesome for a keepsake blanket or like an heirloom thing. That's really a cool idea. So you can do that on your regular sewing machine by lowering the feed dogs. So the feed dogs are what's on your throat plate and pulls the fabric in one direction through under the needle. So if you lower those, the sewing machine is not telling your fabric what direction to go, so you can hold it and move it in any direction you want. If you have like an open toe foot, that or an applique foot even has kind of a more open look to it between the toes of the foot, that allows you to see where you're going, where the needle is going as you're moving the fabric. So those can be helpful. But you really can just go slowly, put your machine on a slow speed, and you can really just move the fabric around in any direction and trace over anything with your thread.
And I mean, we're like 15 minutes into this and I haven't plugged a single class yet, but I'm actually going to plug a class on our sister site, which is National Quilter Circle, because we have a class on doing free motion script, and it's all about how to write with your sewing machine, whether that's, just writing freehand or whether that's tracing over something that you have written on fabric. So that's a fun one if you want to see more in depth on how to do this.
That's perfect.
All right, our next question here is from Tanya, and you might just be able to give her some basic suggestions here. But she says her machine is 50 years old and the bobbin is giving her troubles. What kind of machine would you recommend that is under $500?
Wow.
I know you've got one sitting behind you, so.
Yeah, my little thing here. So I have the Brothers CS 6000i, and that was right around $250. I've been using that for 3 years or so, maybe more. It's never given me any problems. It's, one of their more, inexpensive basic models, but it has everything that I need: buttonhole stitches, zigzag stitches, other stretch stitches, decorative stitches. So that is a really good little one. It's lightweight. I carry it around with me in classes and stuff. So it's a decent option. you can go on all of the machine company websites and price those out as well. Some machine company websites don't actually put prices on their websites. You have to go into a dealer to look at the prices, which is a little inconvenient. But a lot of the websites do have prices that you can go look at the different features and look at the prices and, you know, do a little bit of research beforehand before going into the dealer to test them out, because that is always a good option or a good idea to do, to test drive some machines. But I have had 2 brother machines in my life and basically chose them because they were inexpensive and I've not had any problems. They are just fine, but I've also sewn on Pfaff machines. I really like Pfaff machines. You know, you can search on Bernina, Baby Lock, Janome, Juki. There's lots of different brands to choose from. Husqvarna Viking, of course, and Singer, of course. So you can look around a little bit. I can't really speak to any other models other than the one that I own, but maybe Ashley has a little insight.
Well, I have a brother, a Singer, a Pfaff, and a Viking. I like to change it up, you know, it depends on my mood. But I have to say, I think you will definitely be able to find a machine under $500 that can do everything that a 50-year-old sewing machine can do. So I think you're going to find you're going to actually be able to get more features than you might have had before. So I definitely second what Nicki said, just go and try them out, because there may be brands that have features that you like over another one. Like if you do a lot of sewing with heavier things, Pfaff has the dual feed foot, the integrated dual feed. So things like that on that machine, you know, brother doesn't have. You'd have to buy a walking foot or something similar. So yeah, just trying them out, I think, would be the best way to do that. So, all right, our next question here is from Maggie, and she wants to know if it's necessary to oil your sewing machine every day.
No, it is not. Some machines don't even want you to oil them at all. In the manual for my brother machine, it says do not oil. So I have never touched oil to my machine, which is great. It cuts out a step for me. So check your machine manual for sure. If you don't have your manual, you can type in your search bar your make and model of sewing machine and probably either get the manual as an e-document or find forums where people talk about oiling that machine. Put in your make and model of machine and then oil as your search term, and that will probably bring up some answers for you. But even for machines that do require oil, I'd say every day is not necessary. So.
Yeah, I agree. So you would just have to consult your man. It'll probably be, you know, after so many hours of sewing, or depends on how often you use it, things like that.
I was gonna say, give like a general time frame for how often to oil your machine, but I have no idea. So
me neither, because I've also never owned a machine that's required oil. And I said I have 4 different brands of machines, and not a single one of them require oil. So I don't know if that's like the more computerized ones don't require oil versus older ones do. But yeah, we'll have to leave you to research that one on your own with your, like she said, your machine, whatever machine you have and whether it requires oil. All right, our next question here is from Susan, and she wants to know, what is the best way to replace an elastic waistband in pants, and how do you choose the best elastic? These pants have multiple rows of stitching in the waistband to keep the elastic from rolling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those multiple rows of stitching are definitely great for keeping your elastic from rolling, but when it comes time to change out the elastic, it's a huge bummer because you're picking out a bunch of stitches. So yeah, it's kind of a time-consuming thing, but rip out all those stitches to get that elastic out and replace it. If your pants have if the waistband is a separate piece, you could maybe just take the entire waistband off and create a new waistband out of a similar fabric, or do a contrasting fabric. You have a little color block look. But if the waistband is just the double folded fabric to create the casing for the elastic, then you're going to be unpicking a lot of stitches to get that elastic out. And as far as what kind of elastic to use, if it's like pajama pants or something that you are prioritizing comfort, I would go with a knit elastic, because knit elastic is typically, it's softer, more malleable, it folds really easy. So if you want something that'll sit comfortably with you as you're moving and sleeping, knit elastic is great. It has a tendency to twist in the casing, so you'll definitely want to make sure that doesn't twist with at least 1 or 2 lines of stitching at the side seams in your waistband to hold that from twisting. But for regular daily wear pants, a woven elastic is a really good option. It's a little bit stiffer, a little bit stronger. This one is a non-roll variety. It's got those horizontal ribs that give it nice sturdy strength. So it is less prone to twisting in the casing. It's a little stronger. It's at least this variety. I don't know if it's true for all varieties, but it seems like the stretch is a little bit tighter than the knit. So the knit stretches really easy. The woven is a little bit tighter. So it's a good option for everyday daily wear pants. So depending on your intended end use, you can choose the right type of elastic for the job.
Perfect. All right, our next question here. How can I loosen the sleeve from under the shoulder in the armpit? And then there's a second part of that, but we'll handle that first.
Okay. So under the armpit alterations, so if you are working from a pattern, you can make this alteration pretty easily to loosen up that armpit area. So you can take your, right here's the underarm area. You can just drop that down and decide how much extra room you want under here. Mark that line and then true it back into the arm side. So mark your however much you want and then true it back into the arm side. And that is going to change the armhole, the arm's eye length a little bit. If you're working from a commercial pattern, typically commercial patterns have way too much ease in the sleeve cap anyway, so you're probably not going to have to do any alterations to your sleeve cap because all that extra ease is going to take, going to take care of that anyway. You'll have enough room. But if you are working on from a pattern that does not have a ton of ease in the sleeve cap, this will have increased the length of your armhole. So measure the difference between your original and your new armhole, and you'll have to split your sleeve down the center and along the bicep line and open that up to increase the sleeve cap length in conjunction with this alteration to make sure those match up. But in most cases, if you're working from a commercial pattern, I would say you don't really have to do anything. This is not going to change the length of your armhole all that much, and it's going to be covered by your sleeve cap ease. So yeah.
Say you have to add extra. So if you've done that on the front of your bodice, say it's a 1/2 inch. So then do you have to double that number or change that number in any way to determine how much you need to add to the top of your sleeve cap?
You would so whatever you do to the front of your bodice, yes, you're going to do to the back of your bodice too. So doing the same amount here on your front and your back. Yes, so you would measure the new length, or measure the difference of the length in the armhole here on the front and on the back, and add those numbers together, and that will be the number that you would increase your sleeve cap length to.
Perfect. All right, so the second part of her question was also, how do you loosen the trousers in the crotch area?
Yes, so if the crotch area of trousers are too tight, you can drop the crotch down. Also kind of a pretty easy alteration. So here are it's my fake pants pattern that I drew real quick. So there's your crotch seam, and that's honestly kind of the same idea. Decide how much you want that dropped, make your mark, and then true that back in to the crotch curve. So that would, the new pattern would look like that. And then stitch the pants as you would, and that will just drop that crotch a little bit and give you some more room in there. And that alteration, if you're working from a pattern, that is what you would do. If you have a pair of pants that you want to drop the crotch, you can still do that. Kind of in the same way, but you would, so turn your pants right side out, tuck one of the legs into the other, and then just resew that seam a little bit lower. And that's going to give you a little more room in the crotch.
Perfect. I had a follow-up question and now I just escaped my mind. So if I think of it again, I'm going to ask you, but we're going to move on to the next one here. This question is from Clovis, and she says, what projects can you embroider in the hoop with a 4x4 hoop?
You can embroider any project with a 4x4 hoop. It's the size of the embroidery design that is going to determine the size of the hoop that you're using. And most embroidery machines are very smart. They know when you choose a design, they know what size it is and what size hoops you can use for it. So if you choose a design that is 4x4, and on your embroidery machine screen, it's not even going to let you choose the 4x4 hoop because it knows that that is too small. So, and I think most of them are smart enough that if you even put the 4x4 hoop on, it may even know that you put the 4x4 hoop on, and it's going to say, wait a minute, that is too small for your design, and it's not going to let you stitch. And I say that most embroidery machines will probably do that for you, but always be cognizant of what size hoop you are using and what size design you are using, and make sure you have ample room for your design in your hoop. But any project you're doing, you can be doing a jacket project and use a 4x4 hoop if your design is small enough to fit in a 4x4 hoop.
Perfect. All right, I remembered my question.
Yeah.
So you were drawing on really small scale pattern pieces, so it was really easy for you to just true that line in. But if you're working on an actual size pattern piece, is it easier to use a ruler or something to do that?
Yes, for sure. And to get nice, clean, smooth curves, I use my French curve ruler, which has been carried around with me for so long it has broken and been taped back together, which is not ideal for using and truing curves, but it's down here, and a lot of times I'm using the curve up here anyway. So I still use it, but it's got all these angles of curves around it for hip curves and, necklines and arms, eyes. So as you're truing your curve back in, kind of move your ruler around to find the right grade of curve so that your new curve kind of mirrors the original. Just, you've put it in a little bit of a different position, but the shape of the curve is still going to be basically the same. So kind of move that around and try and find the right angle of curve to get that same shape.
Perfect. All right, our next question here is from Teresa, and she says, which machine needle do I use to sew clear plastic?
For sewing clear plastic, like a vinyl, something like that, I would say an all-purpose needle would probably be fine, but you may want to go down to a slightly smaller size, because when you are sewing through vinyl, just as when you're sewing through laminate or leather or faux leather, since they are not, woven or knit fabrics, they don't behave quite the same. When you make a hole in those fabrics, that hole stays there. Your needle's not, nestling between the fibers, and the fibers don't kind of come back in to cover up that hole. When you make a hole, it is a hole, and you're filling it with thread. But if your needle makes a hole that is too large for even your thread, you're going to have some show through. It's going to weaken the fabric. So a thinner shaft is going to create smaller holes so that you don't get any of those problems. So a size 70-10 all-purpose needle is probably going to be fine.
Perfect. All right, our next question here is from Wanda, and she says, how do you sew hook and loop tape on a sewing machine without all the little hooks and loops catching and knotting?
I have not had problems actually sewing hook and loop tape. Your thread may get caught and sit up a little bit from especially the hook side of the hook and loop tape, because it's stiff and the hooks sit up. But it hasn't really given me problems. I haven't had, thread nests or anything as a result of it. And you can try to use a really sharp needle to make sure you're going through the thickness of that Velcro, the hook and loop tape. Use a thinner or a smoother thread. So don't use 100% cotton thread, because it's, I feel like it would get caught more in those hooks. A rayon thread or an all-purpose thread is smoother and thinner and will lay in those loops a little bit better. So yeah, I have not had any problems with that, but those would be my tips for that.
I think the only time I've had issues is if I've tried to stitch down a sticky back hook and loop tape that wasn't as sticky as you wanted it to be. So do you have any suggestions for something like that? If you absolutely had to use that Velcro or hook and loop tape, how would you go about stitching through that?
So the adhesive backed variety, yeah. I would maybe pin it down anyway, or you don't even have to pin through the Velcro. You can try and find a long pin. If you're using a narrow Velcro, it'll work to pin over it, pin into the fabric and then over the Velcro to hold that down, or baste it first. Did I say that already? Baste it first. Yeah, or even to hold that down. I feel like when you get it under the foot, though, it'll hold it down pretty well too. But temporary spray adhesive can help hold those down as well before you go ahead and stitch.
Deal. I didn't mean to throw a curveball at you. That's just the only time I have problems with it is when you buy like the sticky back and you think it's going to be sticky, and then you try to use it and it comes right off of your fabric. So I didn't know if you had any tips for how to keep that in place. All right, our next question here is from Connie, and she says, no matter what I try or what I do when refilling my bobbin, I always have a clump of thread at the beginning of sewing. Is this a winding the bobbin thread issue or something else?
So getting a clump of thread at the beginning of your seams, it's not typically a bobbin winding problem. That sounds like a tension issue, or a lot of times that issue can be resolved pretty quickly by simply, when you start your seam, start a couple of stitches in from the raw edge. So when you start stitching right at the raw edge, a lot of times the feed dogs and the needle are going to kind of pinch up on the first, quarter inch of fabric, and it's going to create more bulk, and it's going to create tension problems, and you get thread nests and all these ugly things. So start a couple of stitches in from the edge, and that will give your feed dogs enough fabric to grab onto, and your needle and bobbin will have enough room to make the connection to get those first stitches going. You can also use like a starting scrap of fabric and butt that up to your fabric that you're sewing. So start sewing on the scrap of fabric and then just keeps, right on sewing onto your project fabric and then cut that away. So that can help alleviate that issue, that balling up of the thread at the beginning of the seam. Typically that is the problem, or some tension issues, but not winding the bobbin. That I don't think that would have any effect on it.
Perfect. All right, next question here is from Sandra, and she wants to know if there's any way to prevent the lower edges of thin cotton blouses from rolling up during the day as you wear them.
I have had that problem. You can actually, if there is room to fold that under and stitch it, giving that lower edge a little bit more weight and body can help that from rolling up. So just fold it under 1/2 inch to 5/8 of an inch probably, and stitch using a straight stretch stitch or a double needle to give that nice factory finish hem look. That can give that thin fabric enough body to lay flat so that it's not rolling up on you.
Would you ever add something like a hem tape? Or I know you've done like ribbon hems on the bottom of skirts and stuff before.
Yeah, yep. If your garment would look good with that or would allow that, you can add a little something to the bottom. Even a little strip of lace would add some weight to the bottom of that. That's a really good idea.
Well, I learned it from you, so I guess I've had to throw it out there. All right, our next question here is from Marcia, and she wants to know, what is the best way to keep shoulder seams from stretching when sewing garments from knit fabric?
Good question. So when you have, especially when you are sewing curves on a hem, it can stretch out a lot, even more than on the straight grain of a knit. So you can run a line of stay stitching along that curve to help keep that in place. Also, is it hem tape to stabilize curves? I know
I use hem tape for actually doing hems, but
there's a tape, and the name is escaping me right now, but I know that I have stitched a thin, little narrow length of tape into arm size along the curve to help stabilize that. And I don't know what exactly that is called. Maybe it would be stay tape. Obviously, intuitive stay tape. Stay. Of course. Thank you, Ashley. So yes, Google. Yes, thank you, Google. Stay tape. You can sew. It comes in a really narrow strip. You can sew that into your curve, and that will help prevent stretching as well as you're sewing it. So stay tape or stay stitching, which is just a line of stitching right inside the seam allowance, can help stabilize those curves so that nothing is going to stretch out before you sew it or as you're sewing.
Perfect. All right, our next question here, what is couching, and can it be done with a regular presser foot?
So couching is a decorative fabric manipulation, sort of, where you are sewing down a ribbon or a yarn or something onto the right side of your fabric. So that can be done with the regular presser foot if whatever you're couching onto your fabric is flat enough. So like a ribbon, a flat ribbon, you can couch that onto your fabric. It'll slide under the presser foot. But if you are couching something that has, some thickness, like a yarn, you would want to use a couching foot or something similar, like a piping foot or any type of foot that has a groove on the underside that will allow that yarn or whatever it is to slide under the foot, you can use for couching. And typically for couching, you'd use a zigzag stitch to stitch over the ribbon or cord or yarn or whatever it is that you're putting on your fabric. You can use an invisible thread or a thread that matches whatever you're couching on, or even a contrasting thread to add a little more color, a little more contrast, definition. There's a lot of different combinations you can use to play with the decorative, whatever decorative thing that you're doing on your fabric. And so couching, you're applying this ribbon or thread or whatever onto your fabric in a pattern, or you can do it in lines. But typically you would want to draw on your fabric right side where you want to lay your cording, and lay your cording down. And if it's a straight line, you can leave the feed dogs up. But if you're doing in different patterns, it can help sometimes to lower the feed dogs so that you can drive your fabric around wherever you want it. But yeah, there's a lot of different cool things you can do with couching, a lot of different materials and ribbons and cording that you can couch down onto fabric to create different looks, different patterns, and different cool things. So that is couching in a nutshell.
Perfect. All right, our next question here is from Beverly, and she says, I have a bunch of different kinds of presser feet. I have no idea what some of them are, how to use them. What should I do?
Do some research. So I bought a whole box of presser feet, and I was so excited when they came. I got 32 new presser feet, and I have used like 4 of them. So there are a ton of different presser feet available for a ton of different things. So I Google it. That's my Google research. There's a lot of information out there on presser feet, a lot of great sewing blogs too. And the big sewing magazines also have blogs. Sew News has a blog where they blog about a bunch of cool things that you probably want to know. So you can do a little research on that. Sew News, if you have Sew News back issues, they had a really great column called Footwork for a couple of years in 2012 or 2013, something like that, where every issue they would go over a foot and how to use it, and that was really great information. So you can look that up, or if you have a specific need, or if you have a specific application for a foot, just type that foot name, pin tuck foot, into your search bar, and you will get, or how to use pin tuck foot, how to use walking foot, or whatever it is. And you'll come up with a lot of results. And just do a little research, read through some blogs. And I would also say, when you're doing research, this applies to everything and not just feet, but don't just read one blog and say, and this is the way to do it, because there are a lot of different ways to use different feet, or a lot of different ways to use a foot, and a lot of different ways to do everything in sewing. So don't just read one solution and stop there. I would say read a couple and see what way you like best and what would apply to your project scenario the best. So that will require a little bit of research to figure out how to use all those feet, but it's definitely worth it. The presser feet, they make them for a reason. They will help you in your sewing, and they can be really invaluable tools.
Absolutely. I just recently used a binding foot. There's a foot for actually attaching a binding. That one's awesome. But also, just from personal answering previous questions we've had in the past, you don't always know the name of the foot that you're searching. I had someone email a question that they just bought a box of feet at an old rummage sale or whatever they got it. But you can actually just type in what the foot looks like too. And a lot of times, so if you don't necessarily have all of yours labeled, there's still ways to find out what they are. There's still one foot out there that I can't answer, and it's a circular, a complete circle foot, and I have no idea what it's even for. So sometimes you just can't find the answers. So maybe we'll have to research that later. Do you have a circle one? No, see, the whole thing was just, it looks like if you were to attach like a nickel onto the bottom of your, it's just a circle. I have no idea what it's from. Huh. Some of them are mystery, and it looks like an older one, but so if you have that foot out there and you know what it's used for, I would love to hear from you.
Right.
All right, our next question here, they want to know how often you change your needle.
That's a good question, because sometimes I forget to change it until I start getting flagging, or I start getting tension issues and thread issues, and then I'm like, wait a minute, when was the last time I changed my needle? And that's the first thing I do when I start getting issues, is I change my needle, and a lot of times that was the problem. The mysterious they, you know, the sewing brains have said, change your needle for every 6 hours of sewing. But that's not a hard and fast rule. If you're sewing something that will dull your needle quicker, like fleece or faux leather, things that are kind of hard on your needle like that, it may be after 4 hours of sewing, you may need to change that needle a little quicker, as those fabrics will dull your needle faster. So yeah, I try to be cognizant of the 6 hour thing and try to estimate when it's been 6 hours, but that's really hard to tally up to. So usually after every project, you know, when one project has finished up, even if it was, you know, 10 hours of sewing, or even if, you know, a project only took me 4 hours of sewing, usually I'll just change it after every project, just to be safe and to keep a sharp needle. That's a good reminder to me when I finish up a project, or when I start a new project, I'll change the needle.
See, you're much better than me. I kind of do the same thing, sort of whenever it stops working. I feel like there should be like almost like a check engine light kind of thing on your machine that just lets you know when it's ready. It's almost like an oil change. I don't know, whenever it needs to happen.
Maybe in the future they'll come up with a machine that'll do that.
There we go. I think that needs to be a thing for sure. All right, our next question here is from Karen, and she says, if a certain fabric is too thin or too lightweight for a skirt, other than a lining, what can I do to beef up the fabric? I really want to make a skirt from this fabric.
Mm-hmm. Other than a lining. So as we were talking about linings and underlinings, so a lining, typically you construct separately from the garment and then connect to them via the waistband, or, you know, a hem or some part of that. An underlining is slightly different. You layer those pieces together, and then construct, you know, layer the pieces together, baste them together, and then treat that as one fabric piece, and then go about sewing whatever it is, the skirt or whatever. So an underlining is slightly different. It can add body and add opacity to something sheer. So that could be an option. But other than that, to beef up the fabric a little bit, I'm not sure. I would have to think on that. I don't know if Ashley has any ideas. She's shaking her head.
Sort of, I was thinking of adding, I mean, because I've beefed up fabric, but not necessarily for clothing. It would be for like a home deck where I just add some sort of fusible, you know, lightweight interfacing to the back. But, you know, unless you're going to put a lining to where you'd cover that up, I'm not sure that would be the best option either. So not sure why you necessarily don't want a lining, but it might be your best option for a skirt.
I would say so.
Absolutely. Speaking of linings, when sewing with acetate and lining fabrics, they always seem to pucker. Any suggestions to prevent this?
Yeah. I have had that happen as well. So when you get puckering on a seam, often in lightweight fabrics, you'll see that. That can be a tension issue. So when sewing light fabric, it's typically, it might be lighter than, you know, the fabrics that you usually sew. So you might need to do a little tension adjusting to the dial. You can also, one of my favorite tips, I can't believe it took me to the end of the episode to throw in the tissue paper.
Oh no, we're almost gonna make it to the end too.
Nope, gotta slide it in there.
Yeah.
So you can add a little bit of stability to that type of fabric by putting a layer of tissue paper under. I usually do under, but I guess it doesn't really matter. You could do it over, but under the fabrics is typically best, as it is going under the needle. And that will just give that fabric a little bit more body instability and give the bobbin thread and the needle thread something more to grab onto as they're making that connection. And that a lot of times will take care of that puckering issue. So give that a try, and then when you're done sewing that seam, you can just tear the tissue paper away, and you're left with a nice flat seam. Another tip for that is maybe using a lighter weight thread. A rayon thread is a nice lightweight thread. It has a nice smooth finish for that smooth, lightweight fabric that you're sewing. And they do sell thread that is called bobbin thread, and typically it is used in the bobbin, but you can use it in your needle as well for a really nice lightweight thread for when you're sewing lightweight fabrics. And a nice sharp new needle can also help. Lighter weight, like a size 65-9 all-purpose needle is good, or even for those acetate lining fabrics, a microtex needle is a nice option, especially if you're getting snags and tension issues. The microtex needle simply has a really nice sharp point at the tip, and it comes in the wide range of sizes as well. So use a lighter weight, thinner shaft of the microtex needle for those really thin, lightweight fabrics as well. So that all can help the puckering of the seams when you're sewing those lightweight lining fabrics.
Perfect. All right, our next question here, are all jersey fabrics equal, or how do you pick the right jersey to make a dress?
It's a good question, because there are a huge range of jersey knit fabrics that can range in weight from like a double knit fabric that's a really heavy fabric, not all that stretchy, to the really slinky knits that are really great for comfortable drapey shirts and dresses. A lot of stretch. Excuse me. So it all depends on the fiber content of the fabric, the weight of it. So whenever you can, especially for knit fabrics and jersey knit fabrics, I like to feel the weight of those. That's one of the harder things for me to buy online, because I always want to feel the weight in my hands and feel how it's going to drape and how it's going to stretch and how sheer it is. So for a nice drapey shirt or dress, something that has good stretch, is soft and malleable, and lightweight, kind of thin, but not so thin that it is, you know, paperweight and sheer. So kind of towing the line on the weight of that is good for like a t-shirt style and weight of garment.
Perfect. All right, our next question here, when sewing a greeting card or sewing through any other type of paper, what type of needle should I be using in my machine?
Good question. I think an all-purpose needle would be fine for that. You know, the all-purpose needle is a great needle for most of your sewing needs. So all-purpose would probably be fine in a medium weight 70-10, 75-11 size. The one thing I would mention when sewing through paper is that that will dull your needle pretty quickly as well. So after doing your greeting card projects, you might want to change that needle before switching back to fabric for any other fabric projects.
So all those needles you've been saving that you're not really sure whether they're dull or sharp, go ahead and just use them for the fabric or the paper.
Yeah, exactly. That'd be good to clear out that stash of needles where you're not sure if it's at the end of its life or not.
Absolutely. Because after you use it on the paper, it'll be near its end of its life.
For sure.
All right, our next question here. I would like to sew a pocket on the inside of a garment. How do I do that so the stitches aren't showing on the outside of the garment?
That is a good question because I love adding pockets to things, and garments, especially women's garments, are severely lacking in pockets in the ready-to-wear market. I like to add my pockets in a seam. It's a really easy way to add a pocket, and there's not any extra, you know, stitching or seaming details on the outside of your garment. So you can add that pocket bag. If you are stitching something from scratch, you can, you know, stitch those pocket bags onto the front and back in making sure the upper edge of the pockets match up, and then sew your seam. Sew your seam down and then around the pocket bag, and then sew the rest of the seam. You can tuck the pocket bag in. If you want to add a pocket to a garment that is already sewn, you can just remove some of the stitching from the side seam, however, you know, the width of your hand plus a little bit so you can get your hand in there. And you can sew a pocket bag. You can make a pocket bag pattern by placing your hand on a piece of paper or fabric and trace around. It's pretty easy. Cut 2 of those, sew the pocket bag together, and then you can stitch that into the seam allowances of the garment that you just unpicked a little bit of those stitches from. And apart from that, there are ways to add pockets. You can add a welt pocket to a garment, and that'll just have, you know, you'll have the pocket opening on the outside of the garment, and then the garment pocket bag is stitched together but not stitched to the garment. So you'll have the welt opening, but you won't have the stitching of the pocket bag on the outside of the garment. And Ashley, it would be helpful if you have some tutorials, some video tutorials, because we don't have time for me to do a long tutorial on that welt pocket.
I actually, off the top of my head, cannot think of a single welt pocket tutorial that we have. So we're just gonna have to add that to the list of things we're gonna have to have Nicki film at our next shoot, because we had a whole list of them and she just took care of a bunch of them. So we're gonna keep her busy and keep her filming more. But we will, I'm pretty positive we don't have one on a welt pocket, but if we have one on any other kind of pocket, I will post that in the description of this video when it gets posted. But I don't think we have any.
Next time, I'll make sure to do some.
See, that's a good thing. So I guess going forward, because we're about out of time here, so we've answered our last question. But next month, you know, if you have any other questions for Nicki that you want her to answer, not necessarily just here online, but we're always looking for suggestions on videos that we can add to the site, just short little tip ones that we can answer if more visuals are needed. So things to keep in mind so we can start building our list and keep Nicki busy for a long time.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for being here to answer all of our questions again. Again, we hope everyone tunes in next month with more questions, and we will see you then.